Hello, I've travelled back in time to the 18th century. You're probably wondering why. Well, this episode is all about classification, and that story begins nearly 300 years ago. So what does this word classification actually mean then? Well, basically it's just a fancy name for sorting all the living organisms that we know about into groups based on their structures and characteristics. Back in the 1700s, there was a Swedish chap called Carl Linnaeus who came up with a really good system for classification, which we still use today, hundreds of years later. Nice one, Carl. So the first thing that my man Linnaeus did was to take all the known organisms in the world and put them into 5 groups, which he called the 5 kingdoms. So you've probably already heard of the animal kingdom, but there's also the plant kingdom, the fungi kingdom, which contains things like mushrooms and yeast, the protist kingdom, which is made up of single-celled organisms like amoeba, and finally the prokaryote kingdom, which contains bacteria and other organisms such as algae. He then subdivided the kingdoms into groups called phyla, which were then subdivided into classes, which were then subdivided into orders, which were then subdivided into families, which were then subdivided into genus, which were finally subdivided into species. So the complete classification system goes kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. And the order of those is really important because you've got the biggest groups at the top, the 5 kingdoms, going all the way down to the smallest groups at the bottom, the species. So to remember all these funny words and the correct order that they go in, think of this: king prawn curry or fat greasy sausages. And the first letter of each of those words matches up with the classification system. We've already talked a bit about the 5 kingdoms, and you don't need to worry too much about the phylum, class, order and family groups. But the 2 groups that we do need to think about are genus and species, because together they make up what we call the binomial names for all the organisms on the planet. Now you've probably already heard of Homo sapien. Well, that's just the binomial name for humans. So Homo is the genus, sapien is the species, and it's as simple as that really. So for example, the binomial name for this bacteria would be Staphylococcus aureus, and the binomial name for this gibbon would be Hulock hulock.
The funky gibbon.
And just when you think you're at the end of the story, there's a twist. The year's 1990. There's a new guy on the scene. He's cool, he's American. His name? Carl Woese. You don't have to be called Carl to do this sort of work, but it helps. This Carl used all the latest scientific techniques and technologies, such as DNA analysis, and came up with 3 new groups that came above the 5 kingdoms, which he called domains. The 3 domains are Eukaryota, which contains the animal, plant, fungi and protist kingdoms, Archaea, which contains primitive bacteria that are usually found in extreme environments, and Bacteria, which contains all the other bacteria that we know about. And that brings us to the end. See you next time.